Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Amy Antonucci. I'm with the New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund and New Hampshire Peace Action. And I'm really glad to welcome you to our conversation series for April 20th, 2026. Tonight, we're really excited to welcome Pat Hart from 350 New Hampshire. He is going to be talking with us, and we're going to be talking together about connecting climate justice and peace. First, a few words for me. If you are new, we want to let you know that for over 4 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating in a peaceful and just future for all. We do want to take a moment to acknowledge that we do our work on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook people. And we honor the people and the land and water that lived in relationship for so many generations. My internet is unstable, but can you still hear me enough to keep going? Okay, good. I'll wrap up and we'll pass it to Pat. Yeah, so really I just want to remind you that we love when you're on, but your audio will be later. We'll use both the chat and hand raising for the conversation part. And let me introduce the speaker. Pat Hart is a youth campaign organizer with 350, which is a statewide climate justice organization. Pat coordinates and supports the youth team, which is a diverse group of student activists from across the state. Their current campaign is seeking to address the injustices of PFAS polluters, make polluters pay for the harm they've caused. New Hampshire Peace Action is very proud of 350 New Hampshire, which originally started off sort of under our umbrella and has spun off to do great work. And Pat has been a great addition to their team and has joined us for multiple peace rallies and other events. And we're so glad to have him with us. And so I will pass it on to him. Please join me in a visible welcome.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, everybody, for being here. As Amy said, my name is Pat Hart. I use he and they pronouns. I'm the youth campaigns organizer with 350 New Hampshire. And I'm very excited to be here with you all today because, as Amy touched upon, this intersection between climate justice and militarism, the need for peace, is all too salient today. Um, with that, I am going to begin my presentation and share my screen with you all successfully. And that should do it. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so if anybody has if any technical issues come up, feel free to just yell out. But apart from that, let's get things started. So climate and militarism. First off, to begin, we're going to just talk a little bit about like what climate justice is and what it means to not only address the climate crisis, but to address all of the issues of justice surrounding it. To frame climate justice and climate change, it's an ethical and a political issue rather than one that's just environmental or physical in nature. We have to acknowledge that climate change is the result of anthropogenic or human-caused issues or pollution. And we have to relate the causes and effects of climate change to concepts like justice, particularly environmental justice and social justice. Through the lens of climate justice, we examine concepts like equality, human rights, collective rights, and who is responsible historically for climate change. One thing to keep in mind when talking about environmentalism and the climate crisis through an intersectional lens is that there is a racist, there's race concerns when thinking about environmental policy. So when we consider the impacts of environmental damages and the climate change in particular, we do see that there is disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color. So there are institutional rules, regulations, or policies, um, either on the part of governments or corporate entities that decide or make decisions that deliberately target certain communities for locally undesirable land uses and tax enforcement of zoning and environmental laws, resulting in communities being disproportionately exposed to toxic and hazardous waste based upon race. One very well examined aspect of this environmental racism would be the disproportionate response in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in different communities. Another would be an issue that happened just a few years ago in Nashua when there was a proposed asphalt plant in a that was very close to a neighborhood that was predominantly people of color. And that was a campaign that the youth team responded to some years ago. And in order to adequately analyze and respond to this, we had to do so through a lens of climate justice. Because to just say, no, it's wrong for you to be building this asphalt plant so close to these families and to address the concerns from a purely environmental standpoint would not have gotten to the root of the issue, which was partially ingrained in racial struggle. Um, we also consider these communities oftentimes to be frontline communities. So those communities that experience the causes and the impacts of the climate crisis both first and worst. We identify that both Black, Indigenous, and people of color, poor and income folks, those that identify with LGBTQ2SIA, that's Two Spirit and Agender plus, people with disabilities, rural communities, migrants, and those living at those intersections of these and both other identities. Just to pull from that for a moment, one thing to consider is, as climate change directly impacts the state of our environment and the way in which we live and run our lives at its very basic, we can imagine that in the way that the world has been designed with able-bodied people in mind, so can we consider that the world that exists both during and after the climate crisis will be one where it will be increasingly impossible to exist and navigate as a person with disabilities. Um, these frontline communities are also often those that are already doing the work, and we can often look to them for guidance as how to navigate this. I apologize. My cat is rubbing up against the camera. Um, Which leads us to this conclusion that the people that are closest to the problem will be the best equipped to lead on the solution. We can look to the Keystone XL pipeline when considering that and the important work and guidance and leadership that we saw from the indigenous peoples that led the charge, as it were, on that fight. Um, I've mentioned it a few times here, but let's talk a little bit about intersectionality. Um, Rooted in intersectional feminism, it's a branch of feminism which identifies how different aspects of both social and political discrimination overlap with gender, and furthermore, the ways in which the patriarchy and patriarchal thinking reinforces some of the misconceptions and faulty philosophical underpinnings that then lead us to conclusions like might makes right, or um, the conclusion that, well, our economy is based off of oil, and so that is the most efficient and right thing for us to be doing. This coin was this term was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw about 30 years ago. As we see here, we have a number of different ways in which a person's identity can intersect and overlap. including but not limited to one's gender expression, what their nationality is, what their sexual orientation is, what religion they adhere to, what their ethnicity is. Um, Say that 5 times fast. Let me just go back real quick. And then what is positionality? It's every position or identity or of social, economic, or political location that you can hold. For example, I identify as agender, which is why I use both he and they pronouns. I am white. I identify as queer. I'm an American citizen, although sometimes I do feel very distant from my American citizenship. Um, yeah, let's move on. Um, so I'm gonna. I'd love to have a more open discussion at the end of this conversation. So some of these slides are more geared towards live in-person facilitated discussion. So we'll keep this in mind for the end. Um, Here we see Audre Lorde quoted as saying, "There is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives." And I think that this conversation that we're having really exemplifies that. So, what are some other examples of intersections between climate and other fights? Um, we're talking very much about the intersection between the climate crisis and militarism and the fight for peace. One that I'll also name actually, just about a year ago, I was invited to a class at UNH on reproductive justice and the ways in which reproductive justice and the climate crisis intersect. One of the most stark um, examples of this that we identified was one of the inherent parts of the oil industry is extraction, getting it out of the ground itself. And whether that's oil or fracked gas or other non-renewable entities, um, this extraction itself, oftentimes when it's imposed upon a community, uh, can bring sexual violence alongside with it. And we often also find that in the wake of environmental disaster, and especially those environmental disasters caused by climate change related issues, with the degradation of certain social structures, we also see an increase in violence against femme folk. So this brings us to climate and militarism, the intersection of the climate crisis as caused by human pollution and militarism. We are going to be focusing primarily on the United States military, as they are the world's leading polluter. Um, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, is the world's actually that's its old name. I'd prefer not to refer it by its new one if I can help it. Um, is the world's single largest institutional consumer of petroleum and the leading greenhouse gas emitter. Um, this was a couple years ago, but they burned through 82.3 million barrels of fuel, more than the entire total oil consumption of Finland. I would be interested to see what this metric is up to these days. Um, and then here we have this infographic from the National Priorities Project. One military jet, the B-52 Stratocruiser, consumes about as much fuel in 1 hour as you or I might use in 7 years, which is just absurd to think about. Um, the US military, as an entity, just outside of everybody, all of us as citizens, emits more carbon dioxide than a lot of nations as a whole. So we are about tied with the carbon dioxide emissions with the country of Morocco, and we far exceed the CO2 emissions of Peru, Sweden, Hungary, Finland, uh, probably the majority of countries on the planet. Um, and here's a very salient and present issue, wars to secure oil. Um, Here we identify that, and especially one of the conclusions of petroaggression from Jeff D. Colgan is that oil is the leading cause of war. Um, he estimates within that briefing that 1/4 to a half of all interstate wars since the 70s have been linked to oil. And the oil industry itself, from producers to refiners to even like oil producing states, can cause or exacerbate conflict in a number of different ways, like competing over shipping lanes and pipelines, oil-related terrorism, petroaggression, and increasing or capitalizing off of resource scarcity in consumer states, leading to conflict between nations, states, and other entities, which then leads to war. Um, Another instance that I'm sure we all have on our mind is both the military actions against Venezuela that happened recently, and the war that is currently ongoing in Iran, both of which have the roots um, of their uh, of their causes within the oil as a basis of our economy. Um, and then we also have pollution as a result of military action. So there's a lot of costs to wars, and we can talk a lot about the actual cost on us as taxpayers, and the cost on our budget. Um, but within direct war violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan, almost 1 million people have been killed in these wars. We don't currently have I don't currently have access to an accurate metric on the amount of deaths that were caused by the wars in Venezuela and Iran, but perhaps somebody can share that with us. That's at another time. Um, Since 2001, in oil-related military actions, we have seen almost 500,000 civilians killed since that time. And in post 9/11, we've forcibly displaced about 38 million people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, the Philippines, Libya, Syria, which exceeds the total number of people displaced by every war since 1900, except for World War II. Um, we also see the amount of contamination that war causes. So we have water contamination in Hawaii, which I'm sorry, I see if I can. I don't have access to my notes um, on this issue, but my understanding is that there was significant water contamination as a result of there being a military base in Hawaii, and that the United States military has not taken adequate responsibility for its cleanup. We also see, as a result of war like that in Palestine, is that war, um, just at its base level, destroys land that can be used for agriculture um, and other uses. Uh, Beyond that, too, there is sometimes the intentional destruction of resources in order to displace people, whether that's contaminating or destroying wells, whether that's sowing materials on land that would otherwise be used for growing food. Um, and then before we move on to immigration, I would like to also note that one of the things the as Amy mentioned, one of the things that the youth team is focusing on this year is the amount of PFAS contamination that's within our state, both within the Merrimack site as a result of Saint-Gobain. But also one of the sites that we're focusing on is that at Pease Air Force Base, or what was Pease Air Force Base and is now International Trade Port or Airport or what have you. Um, Historically, there's been a lot of testing of fire retardant foam in those places, or rather at Peas, and those that foam is composed primarily of PFAS or PFAS, forever chemicals, chemicals that have such strong bonds that make them really great lubricants and fire suppressant materials. But it's also the way that in which it is that they've been manufactured is that they're almost impossible to break down naturally. And they are also very difficult to filter out for because they're nonpolar molecules. Their contamination is also measured not in parts per million, but rather parts per trillion, the safe level of which is like 12 for our bodies. So, that being said, the amount of contamination that we see in the water in Newington and Portsmouth and that surrounding area is primarily because of the military base that is there. Uh, so here we also have immigration. The climate crisis has been fueled both by capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, and it's making many places of the world inhospitable and will continue to do so as the crisis worsens. Because of this crisis, the climate-fueled movement of people is already underway. So the climate crisis causes, or rather, leads to a number of different ways in which people, or a number of different ways that land becomes inhospitable to human life, including but not limited to the rise of sea levels, like entire countries, island nations going underwater, drought and fire, like we see in California, severe storms and hurricanes. These hurricanes especially thrive off of deep, warm bodies of water. And as the climate crisis warms the planet more and more, we see not only more sources of warm water, but also deeper reservoirs of water that hurricanes can use to, in a sense, refuel themselves. People's entire homes being lost to flooding or other instances or other catastrophes. The making of drinking water unsafe, whether directly through oil spills or consequentially through other forms of pollution. Beyond that, also crop loss, also a result of petroleum pollution. Um, That being said, there are plenty of groups, ourselves included, New Hampshire Peace Action included, that are facing off against both um, the military and those that would seek to maintain our current systems that are built off of oil and war. Here we see some water protectors from northern Minnesota facing off against police in defense of the water that would be contaminated by the tar sands pipeline. Here's another infographic from the National Priorities Project. Um, Within the past 2 decades, and I'm sure that this has only grown since this metric was made, the U.S. has spent $6.4 trillion on war. Um, and economists have estimated that the cost that it would take to shift our entire national power grid to 100% renewable energy is only estimated to be 4.5 trillion. So you can see where if our priorities were more in line with human dignity, we could already have a fully renewable energy grid. Um, Within August of 2022, Biden signed the Pact or the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics law or act into law, which expanded health benefits and for veterans and first responders who were exposed to burn pits and toxic substances during, uh, like those that first responded to 9/11. And this was something that was pushed for by the pundit Jon Stewart. This is a little bit more about our organization, which I'm sure it looks as though many of you have already heard from Amy and myself. Um, I think the takeaway here is that we are building a movement for climate justice and working for systemic change both locally and nationally. Um, Here are some guided questions that we have, which might be useful for us if we were to have a more open discussion. Um, I think that a lot of you that are here on this call, especially as you're related to New Hampshire Peace Action or you're engaged with their work, um, so I don't think that like question three, like have you taken a stance against war? I think everybody here can agree on that. But I think I just want to raise some of these questions so that we can think more critically about the way in which the military-industrial complex and the fossil fuel industrial complex impacts our lives. So I'm not sure what our capacity is for having a conversation about this within the remainder of this session, but I'll just raise some of these questions, and hopefully this will elicit some conversation amongst ourselves. So the first is, what is your relationship to the military-industrial complex? And do you know folks that have served in the military or have been impacted by the MIC? Um, are there any connections that you're identifying between the climate crisis, and militarism that you're making now that you might want to share with folks? Um, how do the paradigms that we've discussed in this presentation show up in our daily lives and structures? What are the ways in which that intersection between militarism and the fossil fuel industry, how does that integrate into our lives? Um, and then lastly, what are some actions that you could take now to resist the military industrial complex and hold elected officials accountable? Um, with that, I am going to open things up. That's not me. I'm going to open things up to questions, comments, concerns, or if people want to answer or think out loud about some of the questions that we've posed. I will stop sharing my screen, and thank you all for taking a time to listen.
Thank you so much, Pat. This is great. Lots of good information, and now time to talk about it and beyond. So first I have a couple, well, here's a question. How political can 350 New Hampshire be? Are you a 501(c)(3) organization? So do you want to talk?
Great question. Thanks, Douglas. So 350 New Hampshire has kind of two branches. The first is 350 New Hampshire, which is our advocacy arm. That's where we do a lot of our direct action. It's the branch through which I engage with the youth team and the young people that I work with. So everything that I do as the youth program coordinator is from an entirely non-political lens. Because here's something that I like to bring up with folks, especially when they like question like how I engage with the young people that I do, is, if there is a young person that comes to 350 New Hampshire, wants to join the youth team, and they are like staunchly against the climate crisis, they want to dismantle systems of oppression, and they want to transition New Hampshire to an entirely a renewable energy ecosystem, and they happen to be a Republican, they are welcome to join, and I would have no issue with that. I haven't encountered one yet, but that would be it. That being said, we also have 50c34 branch, which is 350 New Hampshire Action, which has its own website and its whole thing. Um, and so that is our political arm. That's the part of us that might endorse candidates if we identify that they're climate champions, and we have conversations with them about how they would vote on like hypothetical things. Um, So 350 New Hampshire can't be very political at all. 350 New Hampshire action can be quite political, outside of like actively coordinating with candidates.
Thanks. Doreen has her hand up.
Pat, I have a question for you from Susan Richmond, who can't be with us tonight, but we'll watch the recording. What's actually known about public perceptions of environmental change and environmental justice?
Like, if I understand the question correctly, I think I'm not entirely sure. So, what is known about the public's perception of environmental justice?
Yes.
Um, to be entirely honest, I don't have like polling information in front of me. So I don't know if I would be adequately equipped to answer that question. I think that it would probably be as varied as you would have as any other um, and as any other issue that you might find on the political spectrum. Um, I'm just going to take a step away for a second to turn on the lights in this room. It got dark pretty quick. Well, thanks for your patience.
Oh, did we lost Amy, didn't we?
Oh, we very well may have.
Yeah. Okay. Chris Hansen. Is it letting you unmute?
Yes,
Okay, there we go.
yes, it is. Yes, thank you, Pat. And I put a question in the chat, and I will expand it a little bit here. But so many issues, we sort of get focused on how do we change the elected officials and the government. But I'm also thinking that that's in a lot of situations, that's a recipe for frustration, or takes a long time and you got to remake a whole lot of structures before you get the change that is needed. So I'm wondering what other kinds of who else are we needing to influence in these particular ways to make the changes that we need. And I guess things like boycotting the polluters, if we have a chance to not use those banks that support them, or not buy the products of the oil companies as much as we are in the habit of doing, and so on. But besides how to do it through the government, what are the ways that we need to do it?
Yeah. So, first off, great question. Secondly, I think there's definitely a need for more direct action. There, one of the campaigns within Free New Hampshire is an entity called No Coal, No Gas. And that entity previously has worked pretty vehemently against the use and expansion of fossil fuels within the state, centered primarily around the coal-fired power plants that were here. And up until last year, or rather last year, the Bow coal-fired power plant was closed down ahead of schedule, partially as a result of the efforts of No Coal, No Gas. And that included some more direct action, uh, including but not limited to demonstrations at the coal-fired power plants. I think that there were some actions to help like limit or impede the actual like coal coming into the state via train. Um, I think also just information and advocacy and getting the word out about this and trying to engage with people to think more critically about, like you said, how they consume and what they consume and um, really identifying. So like we've all heard of the phrase or the concept of like one's personal carbon footprint, right? Where, the sum of what I consume and what I drive and what planes I take and what have you, gives me this idea of my personal impact upon the climate. It's my understanding that the concept of a climate footprint is was come up came up as a result of the big oil, like the oil industry, because the idea was to get people to think more about how they are impacting the climate and not like the world's major polluters, like the U.S. military or big oil companies or what have you. So that's not that to say that you shouldn't be thinking about the way in which your actions impact the climate, but I think that it's more of a distraction away from the organizations and companies that do the majority of the polluting, more so than all of us combined.
Thank you, Pat.
Mhm.
Will Thomas has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Mhm.
can.
Okay, good. Thanks, Pat, for all this important information. Couple points and questions, I guess. Um, I want to give a plug. I think Peace Action is sponsoring Earth's Greatest Enemy soon. And Pat, could you comment on that? And how would it be possible, as a former teacher, I would show it to my classes, but to get that film into as many venues as possible for young people. That's one point. The other point is I know that I think the Veterans for Peace, of which I am a member in San Diego, has worked with 350 to highlight the detrimental impact of the air shows. And we've done some work here in New Hampshire as well. With the Blue Angels, the what are the Thunderbirds, and their routines and their practice uh, consume a lot of fossil fuels. And the last point I think I have was well, the fact that we have over 800 military bases certainly adds to the problem. So, we're funding wars now. We have all these bases. We have to persuade somehow the majority of our people that this money should be spent on better things, more life-affirming activities. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. Doug Bogan has a question in the chat. Doug, do you want to unmute and ask it yourself?
Yeah, I was just wondering if younger folks in the climate movement, and particularly here in New Hampshire, are getting engaged about war and militarist issues. It seems like most of the anti-war rallies we conduct or go to are kind of skewed toward the elder part of our population, and it's the young people's future really on both scales. So do you see a growing effort to tie these two together?
Yeah, I do see some of the young activists that I work with either drawing the conclusions themselves about the connection between the U.S. military industrial complex and the climate crisis. Sometimes it's also just as a result of having an open conversation about it. As for what you're touching upon in terms of like a perceived lack of presence at anti-war rallies, I'm not entirely sure. I feel like sometimes it's a disconnect on communication. Sometimes the information on these rallies either doesn't reach the right people in time. I think another big thing too is that a lot of the young people that I work with and that are really passionate about this issue um, don't have a lot of free time, and they're often struggling to make ends meet. And so people are working 40, 50, 60-hour weeks, and the idea of heading out to a rally on top of that can be daunting, especially when you know the need to make a living is there as well. Um, I think also at sometimes these rallies are happening during times where people are working, and even sometimes when they're on the weekends, that's when younger folk are perhaps working their second job or otherwise working in like a service industry job where that's where they stand to make the most amount of tips or what have you. But this is all supposition. I honestly have been concerned and interested about this myself, because especially as a youth organizer, because I would love to see more young people out at these rallies. I think that that stands to be a much more in-depth and thorough conversation, though. I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, I just think perhaps there's other ways we can find for them to get involved. I mean, whether it's, contacting their legislators, I mean, they should be learning how to do that anyway, but, perhaps, we don't all have to be out in the streets or not all at the same time, but if there's some other ways they can plug in, that's great too.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doug and Pat. Doug Whitbeck has a question for you. Doug, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Looks like I'm unmuted. This brushes up against Doug Bogan's question. The Brookline Dems recently had a meeting with young people, and I was in contact and asked to speak to a group of young people, high school level, and I guess it would be called a charter school. And some of them are intensely interested in what can we do, what can we do. They are concerned about their future, the future of the country, the future of the planet. I knew of the 350 New Hampshire youth group, but I was wondering what else there is available for people, young people that want to get involved.
Yeah, are you referring?
Any suggestions on that?
Totally. Are you referring specifically to climate change issues, or like to broader social justice issues?
Much broader than just climate change. I mean, that's
Yeah,
part of it.
I would encourage those students to seek out organizations that are in line with the issues that they're hoping to get involved with. So if that's reproductive issues, Reproductive Freedom Fund, if that's anti-war issues, New Hampshire Peace Action, climate issues, 350 New Hampshire, so on and so forth. I think also that 350 New Hampshire, through No Coal, No Gas, and I think actually also a New Hampshire Peace Action are providing some trainings on like first steps into getting involved. So I think that that would be something that I would encourage the young people to look out for, is trainings on in that regard.
My suggestion to them was first find a news source they feel they can trust. And I also suggested that they contact their representatives, even though they aren't old enough to vote for them. They should be, or they could be, expressing their concerns. But it was more, it seemed to be more focused on the civics issues than the climate.
Dorian, I'm not sure if you were, yeah, you were not
Yeah,
quite
sorry,
muted.
I was muted. Not used
No,
to
that's
this.
okay. Thank you very much for your question, Doug.
Yes, thank you. Barbara has a question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm calling from Tucson, Arizona.
Ooh.
And so at a different part of it, but what I want to talk about is something that is very relevant in your part of our country as well. And that is how the military industrial complex is beginning to erode our communities. And the one thing that's of great concern right now is the proposal to use small modular nuclear reactors in our neighborhoods to produce energy. And this is being voted on in our legislature. I'm in touch with Ira Helfand, who's in the East Coast as well, with PSR. And I'm wondering how we can move forward quickly to put this off the plate, get it stopped. We are raising the issue, we are protesting it, but it needs to go much more widely than where we are within our organization.
Um, I wish that I had a really great answer for you. As you are probably aware, Barbara, this is something that we're also dealing with in New Hampshire. Kelly Ayotte, our governor, as a part of her State of the State address, identified small nuclear as one of her goals for the state in her administration. Um, so with that being said, I I vehemently oppose small nuclear as an energy. Our organization does. Um, I really don't like it when somebody talks about an issue that they don't know a lot about, and I'm going to be honest and say that I need to do more research on it myself. So if your question is what can we be doing now to get ahead of this and stop it from happening, um, I would need to do some more thinking on that, to be entirely honest. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Pat,
I think.
can
Oh,
we
go ahead.
can we call on Doug
Yep,
to address this issue?
by all means.
Yeah, hello again. I actually raised my hand for a different topic, but I'll speak to this. I actually just had an op-ed that I collaborated with Peter Sumsich, who a lot of you know from Portsmouth, former state rep, about Governor Ayotte's position on nuclear and what's going on in the legislature as well. So you can find that in the Union Leader op-ed section today. It was also in In-Depth New Hampshire a week or so ago. That one's free. I think for the Union Leader, you may hit a paywall. But it's a huge issue. But the general line is that nuclear is not going to be cheap. It never was cheap. It's always been horribly expensive. It bankrupted our state's largest utility, Public Service of New Hampshire, back in the 1980s. And it was only by heroic efforts by a previous governor, in that case, I guess, Governor Gregg, with an assist by the elder Governor Sununu, that kept these guys afloat. I think Seabrook would have never gotten built. They didn't build the second reactor. The organization I work for, Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, has been fighting it from day one and fought the relicensing of this reactor. Small modular reactors present a whole host of additional issues, but the bottom line there is that they probably won't ever be cost effective either. But that isn't stopping from the state from getting out and cheerleading for them. So, do watch that in the legislature. Tell your state reps, state senators that they should not be supporting this. So that's kind of the gist of it. I could say a lot more. We have a lot of information on our website. I'd also point people to the organization Beyond Nuclear. It's beyondnuclear.org down in the DC area. They've done a lot of work on this. And actually, one of their people, I'm forgetting the name, Linda Gunter, has published a book just in the last few weeks called No to Nuclear, which goes into quite a bit of detail. It's written for the general public, so I recommend folks picking that up. It's out of Pluto Publishers, I believe, and you can find out more at the Beyond Nuclear website. But there's a lot of good information coming out now. But people should realize that it's been a multi-million-dollar ad campaign propaganda effort by the nuclear industry and now by the federal government, thanks to, the Trump administration. I was just responding on a Facebook post that the Department of Energy put out, like today or yesterday, about the nuclear fuel cycle, as if the fuel could be recycled, which is really, kind of absurd in terms of practicality. In theory, it can be done. In theory, these things could be made safe, but the question is it worth it? So I could go on. I've given long presentations on the subject, but I wanted to point that out. But while I have the mic, I'll say I have also worked on the military industrial complex right here in New Hampshire. Pease Air Base, it was mentioned earlier, but I also mentioned Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which of course is in Kittery, Maine, but it's right next door, and it contaminates our waters as well as those of Maine. And I just throw out the general idea that a part of our effort should be the idea of conversion of military facilities to more useful practices. I've been advocating for about 20 years now. A lot of peace action folks know I've talked up the idea of offshore wind. We now have actual real estate out in the Gulf of Maine that is available for offshore wind development. A couple of companies have purchased the leases for hundreds of thousands of acres of space out in the Gulf to do offshore wind. And the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard could be the ideal location for doing some of the staging, the setup, and the maintenance and operations for those offshore wind sites. If we got off of our military fascination with, submarines and high-tech weaponry and so forth, they could do both, but we ought to be transitioning to a much more safer and human-centered economy rather than a war economy. I think we can all agree on that. So I'll leave it at that. I've been saying a lot, but be glad to get other people's comments.
Thank you, Doug. Moji, you have a question for Pat? Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Moji, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I'm just wondering whether these so-called small modular nuclear reactors in different communities may be related to the push for AI data centers to provide the electricity, the huge amount of electricity they need. And of course, both of these are being pushed by the same political economic forces. Any thoughts?
Doug says yes. You're right on the money.
Thank you for the question. As I said before, I think that that's a great conclusion to draw. I think that there certainly could be a connection between the increased energy demands of AI data centers and the push for small nuclear. But to be entirely honest, like I said before, I don't know enough about it to give you a concrete answer.
Thanks, Pat. We've got time for one more question. Professor Evans.
Hi, thank you, Doreen. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I arrived a little late, so forgive me if you already addressed this, but I'm coming from the Bronx, New York, and while I live in a very polluted borough, my heart is also with the international arena, and I'm wondering about the destruction of vegetation, the pollution and contamination caused by wars overseas, particularly in the Middle East, where civilians' homes and the infrastructure and all of that is being completely obliterated. Toxins and black rain are resulting. and areas where civilians are living are not being able to produce anything now because of the wars. And I'm wondering what could be done, because I know we're talking primarily locally about climate justice and climate change, but I'm wondering what we could do here to assist or help or bring alarm or more awareness to that climate change or destruction that's happening overseas because of the wars that are occurring now.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that one of the most important things to do, especially in regards to the environmental destruction that follows war and is caused by war, um, is to support and work alongside organizations like New Hampshire Peace Action. I think and other international agencies. 350 New Hampshire ideologically opposes those things, and we work primarily within the state to help New Hampshire's transition to renewable energy systems, to oppose the expansion of oil infrastructure as well. But if you're talking about trying to oppose the destruction that happens overseas, my organization would have limited impact on that, apart from advocacy and working alongside New Hampshire Peace Action and trying to engage our legislatures in that means.
Thank you, Pat. And everyone, please thank Pat for a really great presentation tonight. And just in closing, I've got a few things for you. The series is free, but we welcome your support. And I put the link in the chat. And if you'd like more information on 350 New Hampshire, I put the link in the chat for that. Most of our Monday night programs are available to see and share. And tonight's will also be, as soon as we're done, it'll be available on YouTube. And that link is in the chat. And you can stay in touch with us at nhpsaction.org to learn more about what we're working on and what events we're planning. Here's what's coming right up. Our vigils for a just peace for Palestine continue on Wednesdays. This Wednesday, April 22, from 2 to 3 p.m. We'll be at Representative Pappas's office, 15 3rd Street in Dover, and we alternate that every other Wednesday. So next Wednesday, we'll be at Senator Shaheen's office, 350 Central Ave, Dover. Thursday, April 23rd, from noon to 1 at City Plaza in Concord. Other programs coming up. For those of you in New Hampshire, Tuesday, tomorrow, 6:30 p.m., the film showing of The Earth's Greatest Enemy at Red River Theater in Concord. The feature film by Abby Martin is a groundbreaking anti-imperialist environmental documentary. It'd be followed by a panel discussion. It is free to go. I'm not sure if you need tickets or if you just show up at the door. Our next Peace and Justice conversation via Zoom is on Monday, May 4th, 7 o'clock, on the topic of latest developments in Iran with Eitan Mubarak from National Iranian American Council. Mark your calendars for our next action night online at Thursday, May 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Topic will be chosen closer to the date. Thank you again to Pat, and good night, everyone.